Okay, so back up. Previously, I mentioned that sex was a way in which certain kinds of animals that reproduce slowly were able to keep up with animals that reproduce quickly, which prey on us. And the funny thing to think about, things like bacteria and viruses and other parasites, such as a malarial parasite, as preying on us. But they really do, because they use our bodies, they consume our bodies, and they can often kill us. So it's just like being preyed on. And sex was a way in which really allowed organisms to get bigger, because the bigger an organism, the longer it takes for them to grow. So that means that reproduction takes longer, which means that the mutation rate is much slower, because we're not going through this process of copying as many times as smaller animals which reproduce much more quickly. And this enables, by having sex, it enables us to increase the variation, to keep up in this arms race, changing our genetic makeup to better repel animals such as creatures, not animals, such as viruses and bacteria and things like that. So sex is one thing which allowed the development, the evolution of larger, longer-lived, more slowly reproducing organisms. Okay, so that's that point. The actual process of sex, as I mentioned, is a process of genetic shuffling, and genes aren't kind of randomly distributed through your body or in your cell. They're in the nucleus of a cell. The nucleus is a little black spot in the middle of the cell which does lots of things, and one of the things it does is contain the instructions, the recipe, probably a better way of putting it. The genes contain the recipe for making you. So in every one of your cells that has a nucleus, in there is a little recipe for building you. Now, it's not the entirety of you, because quite a lot of what you are is to do with the environment you grew up in and all these kind of things. But there's a recipe for the kind of basic you, and all the kind of genetic bits. And they're not, as I mentioned, they're not stuck in there randomly. They're strung along structures called chromosomes, and humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. There's nothing particularly special about chromosome 23. Many animals have more, many animals have fewer. It just so happens to be that humans have 23. Number one, and they're numbered basically in order by size. So the biggest pair is 1, down to the smallest pair, which is 22. And then these are all common to males and females. These are called technically autosomal chromosomes. The word will appear in a minute, I hope, fingers crossed. And then X and Y chromosomes if it's a male, and then 2 X chromosomes if it's a female. So it's that little chromosome at the very bottom there, this bottom right Y chromosome, this tiny little thing here, which basically makes males in humans. And again, it varies in other species. Certain species, sex is determined by the temperature that the egg was incubated in. Males, if it's above a certain temperature, or females if it's below. In humans, that happens to be the way. Birds are different again. Many different ways of doing it, but we're probably most interested in humans here, and that's what humans look like. So this is the male, as you can see, and that Y chromosome basically has a region on it which turns girls into boys at about 20 odd days following conception. It produces testosterone, which is what turns the little neutered fetus into a male-looking fetus, and produces the physiological characteristics of maleness. And then at puberty, it kicks in again and produces men, turns men into boys. No, the other way around. Turns boys into men. A bit like Eton, I imagine. So there's our chromosome, 23 pairs. They're called homologous. That just basically means that this pair here, this chromosome here, is kind of the same structure as this one here. Not genetically identical, but they kind of pair up. They're kind of the same length and all this kind of stuff. Homologous just means that they're the same kind of structure. 22 pairs common to males and females, called autosomal. Thank God, there's the word. And 1 pair of chromosomes, which determine sex. XX in humans if for females, XY males, as mentioned. One member of a pair migrates to form a germ cell. Now, this isn't the case for all cells, because most cells, they will divide, but when they divide, the chromosomes make copies of each other. So when our cells divide, our skin cells divide following an accident, skin cells will divide, and they will have 23 pairs of chromosomes, just like I described in the previous video for the way that bacteria divide, so our body cells divide to make new body cells. But when we're forming sperm and eggs, this process of sex, for example, if this is a male, we know it is a male, then this chromosome will kind of wander off over there somewhere, and that will go in a sperm, and then this chromosome will wander off of here and go in a different sperm. Right? And it might be that this one here, the right hand one, goes over here, and the left hand one goes over here. So this is the shuffling process. Right? It's the shuffling. We're shuffling our genes. This is what leads to variation. This is why your offspring or your parents are not identical to each other, unless you happen to be identical twins. You know, your siblings, you're identical twins, then you're genetically identical. Not exactly identical, because the environment matters too, but genetically identical. So this process is important. This shuffling process means that a germ cell, a sperm or an egg, has 23 single chromosomes, so maybe one of chromosome 1, one chromosome 2, one chromosome 3, one chromosome 4, and either X or Y. So that means a sperm cell is either going to have an X chromosome or a Y chromosome in it. For females, all eggs have X chromosomes, because obviously females are XX. This leads to genetic variation. This is what means siblings are not the same, because these chromosomes, although they're homologous structures, they're about the same shape, they do not contain the same genes, as you remember. This is a slide from Abnormal Psychology in the first year. I love to reuse things. Each gene occupies a particular position on a chromosome called a genetic locus. And you can either have the same gene on that chromosome, in which case for this particular gene the two chromosomes will be identical, or quite often what happens is you have different genes on the pairs. So this is chromosome 1, say for chromosome 1, left hand chromosome 1, right hand chromosome 1. You can see that the chromosomes contain different genes. Okay. Genes can also be dominant or recessive, which means that a dominant gene has the effect of switching off the recessive gene, which means that you don't see it. Okay, recessive genes are dominated by dominant genes, basically. So if in the classic example here we have homozygous parents, B's brown eyes, little b, big B's brown eyed, little b blue eyed. So we've got, let's say this is the chap here. This is obviously a brown eyed guy who is homozygous for the brown-eyed gene. This is the woman here. She's got two blue-eyed genes in there. Not blue-eyed genes, but genes for blue eyes, which means that this guy's got brown eyes, he's homozygous. This woman has got blue eyes. Now, if we do the sex thing and produce the gametes, the germ cells, so these are two brown-eyed sperm do not have eyes, but they're carrying the genes for brown eyes, and these are the blue-eyed sperm, they're carrying genes for blue eyes. So if you imagine pairing all these different individuals up to find out what kind of kids they might have, then we will find that all of the children will be genetically and appearance-wise, phenotypically, as we say. Phenotype is the physical characteristics or psychological characteristics, which are the manifestation of the underlying genetic makeup. The genetic makeup being called genotype, phenotype. Genetically, they're the same for this particular characteristic, maybe not others. They've all got brown eyes, but they're all carrying a recessive blue-eyed gene. All brown-eyed heterozygous, different genes. Hetero means different, as in heterosexual. So we just imagine, and as I always like to say in this lecture, it is not to be recommended that offspring reproduce with each other for genetic reasons as well as moral reasons. But if we imagine two of these offspring reproduce to keep the graph simpler, then what we find is that the offspring of these two siblings, this has got brown eyes, this has got brown eyes, this has got brown eyes, but this has got blue eyes. So we've got a homozygous brown-eyed, two heterozygous brown eyes, and a homozygous blue-eyed. Homozygosity is the only way that you can get blue eyes, because otherwise it'd be dominated by the brown eyes. So what we notice here is that we suddenly get grandma here had blue eyes, and the granddaughter here has also got blue eyes, but neither of the daughter's parents actually have blue eyes. Traits often skip a generation, and this is why traits often skip a generation, is because you're carrying a gene, you can't see it because it's being dominated by a dominant gene. 3 brown eyes, da-da-da-da. I've said that. It is more complicated than this. Quite a lot more complicated, but let's just make it a little bit more complicated. There's also a thing called crossing over, which again is another way of leading to more variation. Let's just flick forward before we look at that. Here are 2 pairs of chromosomes, so I had them vertically before, now I've just got them horizontally. These are homologous chromosomes, so again we can think of this top one here as being chromosome pair 1. Now the way I described it is that simply this kind of whatever colour that is, orangey coloured one goes off over there, and the bluey one goes over there to form a sperm or egg cell. Remember, 23 single chromosomes in a sperm or egg cell. But what they can do, they lie together and they can actually swap bits of themselves. So we can see this is called a chiasma, just because it's similar to the Greek letter chi, as in chi-square, like an X. It's called a chiasma here, and what we end up with is things very kind of grandly called recombinant chromatids. Basically all it means is that basically one chops its each chop a bit of the leg off, and they swap legs. So again, it makes even more variation, which again is good to keep up with these parasites. And this is the so-called the Red Queen hypothesis by Van Valen, who said that we have sex in order to keep up with parasites. Already mentioned before. Called it the Red Queen hypothesis because in Alice in Wonderland, the Red Queen says that she's always running to stand still. You know, and that's kind of what's going on here. We're in an arms race with parasites. We're never really getting ahead of them. We're never winning the war, but we're never losing the war. We're evolving, changing, but so are they. So we're kind of moving forward to go nowhere with relationship to them, but nobody's winning the war. 3 other points for this. Many traits are polygenic, meaning that they're the result of more than one gene. So skin colour is the result of a whole bunch of genes, as is eye colour, but let's not go there. I made it very simple earlier on. Skin colour is polygenic. There is not 1 or 2 genes, and that's why skin colour is so variable. The same with hair colour. You know, people don't have either black or blonde hair. There's ginger hair, various shades of brown, etc. So polygenic means many genes. So traits are polygenic. Genes have a thing called pleiotropy, meaning that one gene can have more than one effect. So it's not the case that one gene has one effect on your body or your behaviour. Many genes, probably most genes, have more than one effect. So remembering back to abnormal psychology, phenylketonuria, or PKU, a disorder, remember, which can lead to a failure of individuals to metabolize a particular amino acid called phenylalanine, which can cause huge problems if you consume stuff like artificial sweeteners which contain phenylalanine. If you have this inability to do it, lots of problems. But this disorder, this gene affects not just cognitive function, which is the main problem that you want to avoid because it can cause serious mental problems, psychological mental retardation problems, but it also affects hair growth, skin pigmentation too. Genes also interact with one another, so a gene can act differently depending on which other genes are around. So what I'm going to do now is stop, and then briefly the next one will be I'll try to explain very briefly what a gene is. Hopefully that will be relatively short.